Welcome to the Stair Builders and Manufacturers Association Legends podcast series. Today's guest is John Wonderly.
Well, welcome everyone to this edition of SMA Legends podcast. With me, I've got David Ryder with Oak Point, as well as John Wonderly, who is our legend of the day. My name is Jeff Pitcher. I'm with CP Adhesives. And David and I are looking forward to grilling John on all things stair related. David, I'll hand it over to you.
How did you first get into stair building, and what kind of drew you into the craft?
Well, so I grew up in a your typical 1960s, ranch plat with probably 1,200 homes, and maybe 100 of them were 2 stories with stairs. And 4, 5, 6 years old when I started walking to school. It was such a tiny little village. There wasn't any busing, so you walked to school. So every day I would walk past the construction sites where they were putting up these houses, and that just fascinated me, watching the carpenters work. So typically on the way home from school, I would stop into the job site and absolutely pester the carpenters to death with questions, and it got to a point, it was the same crew that built all the houses. So they were in there for years, and I'm sure they cringed when they saw me coming, this little 5, 6, 7-year-old kid. So they had a coffee can that they saved for me, and they'd pay me a nickel to go around a job site and pick up nails. And I think a lot of times they just threw nails out, when they saw me come. But it fascinated me. And then a couple of times when I walked through a house where, there was a stairway. I mean, it was a very simple carpet grade stair, 2 feet of railing at the bottom, maybe 2 feet of balcony at the top, walls in between. But that just fascinated me. And then also, back then, you had a house and a sidewalk, and that's it. No fences, no patios, no storage sheds. And also back then, if anybody wanted one of those, they built them themselves. That you didn't have companies going around building decks and, fences and storage barns. So on Saturday morning, if I heard a saw, if I heard a hammer going anywhere in the neighborhood, I was that, sticky piece of gum on the bottom of your shoe. You just couldn't get rid of it. So here, hold this tape measure. Here's a sledgehammer, bust up the leftover concrete, hold this form, spread this pea gravel kind of thing. So, and the just construction just fascinated me. And then, I took wood shop in high school, but really stairs specifically, my father and I, we took a motorcycle trip. We just headed east, and we didn't take any highways. So we went through every little small town for 2 weeks, and we ended up in Boston, Massachusetts. And we went into a building called the Old Boston State House, which was the capital of the colony of Boston at the time. And the building's still there. It's a museum, but inside there's a 3-story circular stair that is super tight, all wood, freestanding. It was made in England, disassembled. The master stair builder came over with his apprentices and, reconstructed the stair. He went back to England, and the apprentices stayed in the United States. That was their, they were indentured servants. But anyway, we walked into the museum when it opened at 9, and I saw that stairway, and they gave a tour every hour, and I kept passing on the tour because I wanted to look at the stair. And finally at 4 o'clock, the guy said, "Hey, this is the last tour. You paid to take the tour. You've stood here and looked at this stairway all day long. Are you going to take the tour?" Well, my dad said, "Yeah, I'll take the tour for the 3rd time, but my son just wants to sit here and look at the stairs." So I literally just stood there and looked at that stairway all day long, completely fascinated. It had traditional, wooden baluster, the wreath rail work, inside and outside rails. The balusters had a rope twist, a flute twist, and a reed twist, every third baluster. So after it was done and he closed up, he said, well, why you've been here all day? What's the deal? And I just told him how fascinated I was. So he spent another hour and a half with us after they closed. He took me down into the basement. I could see the stair where the tour didn't normally go.
Yeah.
He told me the story of the stairway, and so, at the age of 14, that was it. I'd always wanted to be a woodworker. I just, if anybody was running a saw in my neighborhood, you couldn't get rid of me. So, but when I saw that stairway, that was it. And
That did it for you.
I just remember praying, Lord, if it be your will, I would like to do this for a living. If I could ever build a stairway like that, I would consider myself having a successful career.
Well, that's beautiful.
That's literally where it started and when it
That's great.
started. And you can go there today because it's still a museum.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's
a
good.
good one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
So, John, what would you say is people's largest misconception about stair building?
Ooh, well, I would have to break it into categories. There's the general public, and then there's the general construction field, and then I'd say there's interior carpenter. So the general public, it's been my experience, they do not have a clue what is involved about building stairs. I mean, don't have the foggiest clue.
As a member of the general public, I would agree.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. My career was 35. I was self-employed for 35 years. My working career was longer than that, but that's how long I owned my business. And I can't believe how many people would ask me, oh, hey, what do you do for a living? And I said, well, I'm a stair builder. And I say, well, you can actually do that and make a living? People actually build stairs. And I'm thinking, what do you think? They just, just
appear,
pop out of the clouds and appear. So there's that. And then, the general construction trades, I think they have a little more of an idea of what's involved, but still, it baffles them, plumbers, electricians, other, framers, other construction trades. And then even trim carpenters, a lot of trim carpenters have assembled, pre-manufactured stair components and built, more simplistic stairs. But I think that's probably the only part of the general public that maybe would have a clue as to how difficult they are. But yeah, I think most people, they don't have a clue. And most of my clients down through the years, they always had an open invitation to come into my shop and see their stairway being built.
Mm.
And, I've had people fly in from out of state to do just that. And, when they walk in and they see each phase, or I would videotape, making their balusters or, machining their wreathed rail and all that. It was just fascinating to them because they had no idea what processes took place to create a stair. So, yeah.
It's interesting. I guess that's probably a good segue into the question. What do you think's been the most challenging type of staircase you've ever built?
Well, that's an easy one.
Oh,
Freestanding elliptical stairs.
freestanding elliptical.
Yeah. A standard curve stair, quarter turn, three-quarter turn, half turn. All the radiuses are consistent.
Yeah.
But with an elliptical, that's a whole different ball game. You have, multiple radiuses or arcs, a curve that can't be defined by a single given radius.
Mm.
When all that comes together, the geometry involved on that third axis is very, very difficult. And then to make it all blend, you have to skew the treads. And then anytime you have a skirt board that's coming down at say a 22 degree angle, and it meets a steeper part of the stair to where it drops off at a 36 degree, you don't want to have that point. You want it to be a nice flowing curve to where nobody can tell where the radiuses intersect and change. So that is I found to be the most difficult part of building a stair is the ellipticals and specifically the freestanding, because what you have to do on the top, you have to mimic on the bottom.
Hmm.
So, you don't want the soffit on the underside of the stair to have those, abrupt angle changes. So to me, that's where you take the science and technology of a stair and then you add in the artistry,
Yeah.
and it's the total combination. Um,
That kind of gives me nightmares, honestly.
well,
But
it turns the hair on my chin gray, that's for sure.
well, you mentioned technology. Obviously, you've seen some changes in technology over the years. How's that impacted what you do?
Well, that's an interesting question. Um, when I figured out I wanted to build stairs, um, I thought the process would be simple. I would find an old master stair builder to apprentice under, and I would glean from him for years, and then I would be stepping off onto my own with this, complete toolbox, full set of knowledge and experience, and just move right on and figure I would embrace whatever new technology came along. Uh, the reality was further from the truth. Um, so early on in my career, as I would go to the IWF show, that was held in Atlanta every other year, I would always be looking for stair building equipment, things like that. And I liked the traditional, you know, construction techniques and things like that. Um, but all my questions, everyone would answer, well, you need to go to the Ligna show in Germany to get that question answered. We don't have that kind of machinery here in this country. Even the companies that would specialize in stair building equipment, that sold most European equipment, they would say, yeah, we don't even bring that stuff over here because there's no market for it. So I remember finally I just decided, why am I even going to the IWF? There's nothing here for me. Next year I'll just go to the Ligna show. So out of 140,000 people that went to the Ligna show that year from around the world, there were 72 from the United States.
Wow.
So I was one of 72.
What year was
So,
that, John?
oh golly, that was 28 years ago, maybe. Yeah, it was a long time ago. But when I was over there, I could speak pretty decent German. I could order at a restaurant, I could get around the train stations and all that stuff, but my technical German was terrible. So I took photographs, of my refittings and anything that I wanted to do, spiral cut balusters that I was doing by hand and all that. So I took photographs. And when I went over there to the show, it would be very evident that my German was not that good. And fortunately, most of the companies had someone there to speak English. But then I would be using photographs, and I drew quite a crowd. You know, um, I think my bad German brought him over here, trying to think, where is this guy from? And then they started seeing the photos and they could pick up on the conversations. But I saw a lot of CNC equipment over there. This was really early in the transition. This was before laser measuring really got started, but it was conceptual back then. You know, Companies like Festool, that refused to market in the United States because there wasn't a market for quality here at the time. Uh, but I got exposed to a lot of technology over there that, quite honestly, I didn't know existed. And, when I was talking to a lot of the machinery companies, and again, I got quite a crowd of people around me. Um, I think they were interested in, number one, listening to my accent, but number two, I was asking, I think, a lot of questions that they wanted to know the answers to as well. And since I had photographs, the salesman would pass the photographs around to the crowd, and it ended up being a 10-person kind of conversation. But anyway, like after I was finished at the booth, it never failed. I would have 4 or 5 people come up to me afterwards and say, they would introduce themselves and, hey, I own a stair shop in Bremen, Germany, or I own a stair shop in Augsburg. Please come and visit us. So, I was there for 10 days. You could only go to the show 3 days or 4 days. You couldn't go any longer than that. They had to rotate people through because of housing. Um, so I ended up visiting like 10 stair shops all over Germany. I had an unlimited pass for the bullet train, and I could visit a stair shop in Berlin in the morning and go to Bremen in the afternoon, and you know, uh, and quite a few of the shops that I went in almost had two buildings. So I would walk into one, and they would have a Maka, 5-axis CNC, and that's back when 25 years ago, 5-axis in the woodworking industry was extremely rare. But that machine was this in the center of their facility, and everybody around it was just supporting that machine. They would take the parts off and they would sand, and then go to finish. And German stairs are very different from the stairs that we build here in the States. So everything was technology. It was I even saw a couple of robots back then in some of these facilities, which I had never seen anything like that before. But so they would show me the tour. They would give me the tour and they would show me all of their high tech, you know. And then we would walk out of that building and go to the original building, and that's where they had all the old guys building the truly custom artistic type stairs. And there was no advanced technology in that building. And back then, the software just wasn't developed as much for the wreath rail fittings and things like that. And what they did develop, they needed specifically for their production stairs. They needed that Maka to be producing these wreath rails for this production line stair. It was too expensive to stop it and have it run all day long for one fitting.
Yeah.
And the old guys doing it the traditional way could crank 5 of those fittings out in a day.
Wow.
So I went over there wanting to answer multiple questions, and that was the question that one of the big ones that I had answered is, could I survive my career without having this high technology? Because as fascinating as I found the CNC equipment and all the robotics and all the advanced machinery and technology, what I really wanted to do was make sawdust with my 2 hands. I wanted to craft that wreath rail fitting with my own 2 hands. That's what was valuable to me. So even after seeing all that advanced technology, which did not exist here in the States at the time,
No.
it just wasn't here. So I when I left Germany the first time and I came back, I thought, well, I can probably last my career doing it the traditional way.
Mm-hmm.
But I also knew that eventually the technology would catch up with me and I would probably have to make a decision. And I was just hoping I could finish my career out before I had to make those decisions. I think my timing was just about perfect because, if I would have stayed in business any longer, I think I would have been forced to, transition over. I mean, I ended up with an NC copy lathe, not a CNC, but an NC copy lathe. And, if I would have stayed, I probably would have been, forced to go the CNC version, but that's just not how I wanted to live my life. And, but yeah, the technology, I've seen it change the industry tremendously. But I experienced that in Germany before it ever came to the United States. And it seems like back then, stuff I saw, 28 years ago in Germany, maybe 7, 8, 10 years later, I started seeing it in the United States. So I felt like I had a 10-year preview of what was to come.
how do you kind of balance safety codes with creative design requests from your clients?
Well, again, back when I got started, uh, the jurisdictions that I worked in which was mainly a local market, they didn't even have a code for baluster spacing. I mean, there were many builders that put a baluster 12 inches apart. Oh yeah, and especially when my children were born, it's just like I would refuse to do that. I would tell their salesperson to send out more balusters, and it got to a point where at the end of the year I was getting back charged for all these extra balusters I was ordering because they refused to put them in, and I refused to build them without that. So you know it cost me a lot of money at the end of the year because I worked for 3 or 4 different builders, and
Yeah.
to do a job and then get back charged for an additional 25 balusters every job, and they would just take that out of my pay. I couldn't convince them otherwise, but
Uh,
so that's how I handled it. But when some customers, they don't want a wall rail here, or they don't want this, it was always um, a delicate, constructive uh, conversation to have, trying to convince them, um, that these certain things needed to be safely done. And a lot of times I would say, well, I'm going to go ahead and make your wall rail and I'm going to mount it like it's permanent. You know, if you don't want it on there and you take it off yourself, that's up to you. I'm not going to recommend you do that.
right.
I'm going to install it. And, again, I would have some builders literally back charge me for the cost of that wall rail and the labor to install it because they said, John, the customer doesn't want it. Code doesn't require it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
then we need to change the code. You know, you need to think beyond, the dollars and just go to safety. So, and there's always that one person that, you know, I really don't want a handrail and a guard on this stairway. And there was a couple times in my career that I said, I'm going to invite you to have a successful experience with somebody else building your stairs. I don't think I'm the person to do this for you guys. So, it did cost me some jobs down through the years,
Hmm.
but, that's one of the nice things I saw about the SMA is like, man, here's this organization that's actually trying to make good codes for the industry. And, yeah, that was one of the things that drew me to the SMA. It's like maybe I wouldn't have to fight these builders anymore. And I'm getting tired of being back charged for the money I'm being back charged. All this stuff I could afford, an annual subscription to the SMA.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But
That's
it was
great.
challenging down through the year, especially when I started getting into, I guess what we're calling the monumental stairs now. Really large scale projects. Um, some of the engineers and the architects and the homeowners are really, they started asking me to do things that was very technically challenging, and they just didn't like the way this looked. They had all this beautiful window and here's this rail going across it. So, you know, trying to come up with creative solutions, mainly in the design. And it's like, well, if we do this, maybe we can add a post here and here that would line up with the pillars and the windows and make it look more consistent.
Mm.
Or, if we add a curve here, then that curve adds a nice blend and it won't stick out. So, there was a lot of that down through the years. And fortunately, with those larger, more monumental stairs, usually there was room in the budget to add some of those creative solutions.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So over all these projects, what would you say was your favorite material to work with?
Well, I can guarantee it's been wood.
Any specific species or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So my all-time favorite wood is a wood that comes out of Washington and Oregon, called quilted maple. It comes from the big leaf maple tree out there, so it's not a it's not a hard maple, like we have here in the eastern part of the United States, and it 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 looks like you took a bunch of clear marbles and suspended it in clear epoxy, so it creates a three-dimensional look. So it almost looks blistered. So I
Nice.
would use that a lot to cap handrails. If I had a cherry or walnut handrail, I would put a quilted maple cap on it. And as you walk up the stairway, it almost looks like a hologram.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, you can see the colors like rolling over the top of the marble. And I know a lot of clients would, when they first see it, well, John, aren't you going to sand this? Look how bumpy it is. And I'm like, well, go ahead and touch it. I mean, it's as smooth as a baby's butt.
That's
But
cool.
yeah, the way it refracts light, because it's similar to like a curly maple, where the grain is kind of molded to itself like this, and it's round, so you're not looking into or out of the grain directly. So when you walk past it, the way it refracts the light, it looks like the shadow just kind of rolls over the grain as you go past it. And so that is my absolute all-time favorite wood. um,
Yeah.
and then I always enjoyed working with reclaimed wood, specifically wormy chestnut.
Hmm.
um, you have this material that, if you know the history of chestnut, it dominated the eastern forest of the United States. About 70% of the forest was chestnut, and these trees were 400, 500, 600 years old, and then they would be cut down and made into a cabin or a barn that would last 150 years, and then they would tear the barn down and then take all the beams and resaw it. And, so it had life as a stair or life as a cabin or a barn. And now it gets to spend the rest of its life as a stairway or an entry door. And just the character that it has, and the fact that, when you first look at it, you think, this is a stack of firewood. Why would anybody, the customers would come in and I would show them all this wormy chestnut. They would, John, this looks like firewood. And then, once we machine it and process it, then they come in and they're just like, wow, I can't believe this transformation. And, to me, it just has always been a reminder of my faith, uh, something that, you know, it looks like it should be tossed away, but, when God touches it and reclaims it, now it's more beautiful than it ever was before. And all the character marks, all the struggles that it's had as in its life now just creates such a beauty to it. um, just enduring quality. So that was always very humbling for me to work with that material, and I always enjoyed that, specifically though the wormy chestnut.
That's great. That's great. That's actually, sounds like you've worked on some really interesting projects, obviously. Is there anything that kind of stands out to you specifically, a memorable project that you worked on that, you know, has some kind of tie-in with you in your craft and sort of your philosophy?
uh wow. I have been so fortunate, so blessed, uh, in my career. I've, especially for a one or two man band, I've been involved with some projects that have just been incredible. So for me to pick out one is difficult, but there are a couple projects that stand out for various reasons down through the years. Um, the first stairway that I created was a freestanding elliptical. That was the first stair uh, that had my patented handrail. I had received my patent on my handrail design just prior to building that stair. So it's like that. That was a freestanding elliptical, rails on both sides, wreath work, two flights down, and that was right after I received my patent. So that one's always going to stick out in my mind. It's like that was the first uh, official, you know, patented handrail on the stair. Uh, but then, my first stair with quilted maple, that that stair will always stick out in my mind because I guess I can say this on the podcast. So I always did a 1 year follow up on every stair that I've ever built. I would go back and visit the homeowner a year later, always take my touch up kit, I'd fix all the nicks that the movers put in and everything, and then usually the dust settled, everybody's nerves are calm and relaxed, and it would give me an opportunity to talk to them and basically, hey, give me an analysis of how the project went, were my drawings concise, did I replicate your dream accurately, how was my communication? So I would really open it up to as much criticism as possible because I wanted to, make myself better and serve my customer a little bit better. So I always highly valued that. And the first project I did with quilted maple had octagonal box newels, and the cap was this 3-inch thick quilted maple, and it was machined all the way around. And the rails had quilted maple on top, and they were curly cherry rails and curly cherry posts. So when I went there to do the 1 year follow up, it was both the husband and wife was there, and man, he just went on and on and on and on about it. And he was so thankful that I showed him that wood.
Yeah.
They were looking for something unique and different and had no idea what they wanted.
Yeah.
So that opened up an opportunity for me. And when I showed him that was it. And his wife she was standing up on the landing of the stair, leaning on one of the posts, just listening to him, and finally she said, John, I'm just going to sum it up like this. Every morning he gets out of bed, he goes down and makes his coffee, and he spends the next 15 minutes climbing up the stairway because the sun's coming in the front window, and he's going back and forth, looking at how the marbles are moving inside the cap. And she said, I put on a lace teddy one time and stood at the top of the stairway, and I said, can you come up the stairway a little faster? And he's like, now you're just going to have to wait. I'm looking at this post. So that was a little awkward, but, yeah, but so that one will always stick out in my mind,
Yeah.
and the thing of it is I sympathize with the guy. I would have done the same thing. It's like, man, the the beauty in that quilted maple was just stunning. So
Some might say better than sex.
I don't know if I
We
can
can
say that
edit
on
that
the
out.
podcast. We might have to edit that one out. But yeah, that will always stand out in my mind. And I mean, I can picture that stair today. I can even remember some of the dimensions on that project, but it was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Really
And then
cool.
the first major project I had. So I know all the metal guys that listen to this will cringe when I say this, but for a woodworker, you get to a point where you commit the ultimate sin and you build a stairway that has more metal than wood.
Oh no.
Yeah, so you cross over the minefield and you go into the metal realm. Sorry, Noma, but that was a huge transition for me. But the first big metal project that I did, it still had a lot of wood in it. That will always stick out in my mind just because it was such an engineering challenge. What the architects wanted and the engineers said couldn't be done. That was a neat project. So, but like I said, the Lord's blessed me so much. I've really had just a lot of those opportunities throughout my career that it's just hard to pick one. It's like I can pick one in each category, but I can't pick one category that wins out over another. But the quilted maple story I will never forget.
Right.
I will tell that story to my grave for sure.
So, technology aside, John, how have you seen changes in the industry overall? aside from technology? We talked about that. What else
Well,
is?
again, I was in business for 35 years. So, there was a lot of changes in that 35 years. Um, the design flavors, I'm going to call it, 35 years ago, at least in the areas that I worked in, no one used metal of any kind.
Hmm.
It was all traditional wood. And then you would have an occasional metal balustrade that was, custom fabricated. It wasn't your standard, you know, store-bought metal baluster that you can get today. So that was I experienced that transition, to where you started doing some metal stairs or metal railing components. Um, that was a big shift. And then a lot of the changes were just the wood species. There for a while, it seemed like for 3 or 4 years, the only wood I ever used was, genuine mahogany. And then it seemed to go to select white maple. I bought all my white maple from a company out of Northern Ontario. And, it seems like I was getting a truckload of maple from them a couple times a year.
Hmm.
And then, it would shift to white oak or it would shift to cherry. Uh, Oddly enough, I think throughout my career, I've maybe built 3 stairs out of red oak in 35 years.
That's
Interesting.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's fun.
And one of those was almost at the end of my career because I was replicating, somebody, their 28,000 square foot home wasn't big enough. They added another 15,000.
As
And
one does.
yeah, you have to. Um, and they wanted their stairs replicated exactly like the stairs that were built originally to the house. And unfortunately, it was red oak.
Oh,
So it's like, you know, 32 years into my career and I'm doing my third red oak stairway. Uh,
wow.
but I've seen the wood species change a lot. And then, design, you go from the, traditional design that you would see in a, colonial home to a more contemporary design. The balusters um, design were different. So out of the 35 years, um, 28 years of those, I made my own balusters and newel posts. And I had probably about 6 designs that I would call my design, that they could pick from. But most of the stairs that I did, I would design a baluster and a newel post design specifically for that customer. And then I would never replicate it. I'd put their name on the bottom of the sample and I would never replicate it. So I've seen their tastes change down through the years, to go to a much more contemporary style of baluster. And, even the handrail, predominantly my patented handrail was very sought after. But there were some people that wanted a more, contemporary look to the handrail. So, I would design a special handrail just for their stair. And, so I've seen that contemporary style, come about. And then, oh, glass. We would do a lot of acrylic inlay work. Um, so yeah, just, that just in the design styles is and materials is what I noticed most differently as far as change goes.
Interesting. Interesting. So, what advice would you give to young people looking into the industry and maybe some young people that are just now getting into the industry?
Well, I wish someone would have told me this early on. You know, growing up in a little village in rural Ohio, uh, I wasn't exactly exposed to the world. That was before the internet, but I had no idea how broad the industry was.
Mm.
It really wasn't until I went to Germany that kind of the blinders were taken off. Um, I met a gentleman over there called Willibald Mann, and he was like the German stair guru. He wrote all the stair books. He was the Moat of Germany, you know. Um, and I just had no idea how broad the industry was. I didn't know that you could build some of the stairs that were being built. I just wasn't exposed to it. So I would tell a young person today, um, it's an incredible industry to get into. It's very interesting. It's very creative. I think it's more creative today in general than it was 20 years ago. Um, just because people are demanding more and more unique products. Now this is kind of separating from the production homes.
Yeah.
There just isn't as much room in their budgets for creativity. Not that they aren't creative, but some of these monumental stairs that are being built are you know works of art.
Yeah.
Um, every stairway is a work of art, but there's some of those that just stick out. It's like, man, these are the Mona Lisas, and I would just encourage them to uh, seek out and hopefully realize how broad the industry is and how much it has to offer, especially for someone that has a creative mind. It gives them a creative outlet, and really the sky's the limit. So yeah, and I wish I wish I would have had somebody be able to tell me that when I was starting out. I
Yeah.
kind of had to figure it out on my own, but it would have been a whole lot easier if I would have had some encouragement to that effect. And, somebody said, hey, I know you think the stair industry is this narrow, but it's really 15 miles wide.
Yeah.
And it took me years to finally figure that out.
Yeah. Mhm.
It's
Right.
funny, John. I've tried to get that across to young people trying to figure out what they want to do, and I get the strangest looks.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the impression. They really do think it's that
Yeah.
wide. And yeah, it's
Well,
crazy.
so I served on an education committee in our local county for about 25 years. And part of that spread over to the regional educational authority, which basically means I would go around to all the different trade schools and give motivational speeches to the juniors and senior class every year. So I did that for 10 or 12 years. And I know every time I would do the introduction, now I'm speaking to construction trade students at the career centers. Um, and inevitably, every single time I would, introduce myself, tell them what I did, and I would start out, does anybody have any questions? And man, the hands would go up and say, you mean you build stairs for a living? That's a job? People actually do that? So it's it never failed. I would get that question. And then I would try to tell them, yes, this is a career and it's a demanding career. And if you are good at this, you can go anywhere in the country and work, and it gives you a creative outlet. And yeah, so I that's the advice that I would give is, you can really, it's like anything else in life. If you dedicate yourself to it and you're not afraid hard work, the sky's the limit. It
Sure,
really is.
Oh, that's good advice. Good advice.
it is. So for the guys who don't want to go down that career path yet feel compelled to create their own stairs, uh, what would you say is some of the common mistakes in that endeavor?
The first mistake, not calling a professional stair builder.
Clearly.
The second mistake, not calling an SMA stair builder.
There you go.
Um, well, obviously, I have seen a lot of, do-it-yourself projects down through the years. Anytime we would go to a party at somebody's house, inevitably the owner of the home would say, "Hey, John, I hear you build stairs. Man, let me take you down in the basement. I just finished my basement. Let me show you my stairs." And I would most times have to bite my tongue and just say, "It looks like you really enjoyed building this. Good for you." Uh, the rise run ratios never fails. You know, they built over the construction, stair that was constructed that was built in the basement. The rise run was never determined. So you trip on the first step and the last step, and you can feel how the rise and run ratio changes throughout the stair. So I saw that a lot. And then another one is just the attachment methods for the balustrade. I got so many calls throughout my career. Hey, can you come and tighten up our railing? And it's like the previous homeowner, took the railing out and put in, a new rail. And, you grab the post and it moves 6 inches at the top, couple of toe screws, maybe a little dab of construction adhesive, and, man, you've got a handrail. Those are probably what I've seen the most of, rise run, and then uh, handrail and guard attachment issues.
Yeah, you mentioned the wood species you liked incorporating in the rails and the caps, give that visual effect. Is there some kind of signature style that you liked incorporating into all of your designs? Is there anything kind of like that that's the
Well, like I
John
say,
Wonderly touch?
I did have my patented handrail, so any stair that has my handrail, I built it. Probably at least half of my career, I used to do a lot of wood carving.
Mm.
So like an ornamental stair bracket on the side of the stair.
Yeah,
Um, it always bothered me to have just a plain bracket there.
yeah.
So it got to a point where I would do relief carvings in these brackets. Um, and I developed a style, uh, the uh, the old world style of hand carving where you wouldn't sand it smooth, so you would come back with a finished chisel, and it's called a facet cut. So when you look at a lot of the really old wood carvings, Tillman von Riemenschneider of Germany, the famous 1600s wood carver, you know, if you look at his work, they never sanded anything. Everything was finished with the wood chisel. So it's really tiny faceted cuts, and it refracts the light. So I really tried to mimic that style. And so that was kind of my style. And I did a lot of that when that was popular, you
Yeah.
know. Um, I did a lot of that wood carving, um,
Nice.
and that style, but mostly it was my handrail and my style of wreath fittings and things like that. Um, that would that would probably be the John Wonderly stair, is
Yeah.
my handrail with that wreath style, and then carved brackets, um, or inlaid brackets. I remember I didn't know that the SMA had Staircraft Awards. And I remember Dave Cooper calling me one time and saying, John, we need some more entries. And, you know, I saw a couple of pictures of stairs that you built. I want you to enter, And so I sent him, I sent him an entry. I didn't win, but I noticed the next year on most of the SMA printouts was a photo uh, of one of my inlaid brackets on the stair.
Oh,
So,
nice.
uh, yeah, that was kind of fun to see that. But yeah, that's probably my style. I really like that, traditional style, and I loved carving. That was a ton of fun.
Yeah. It's good.
I think I know the answer to this, but what would you say is the most satisfying part of your job, or was?
Walking out of the shop at the end of the day and seeing a pile of sawdust.
There you go.
You know, I when I started this, I was 24 and I really didn't know beans from apple butter. I didn't know anything about running a business, starting it. I'd never worked in an office environment. I just knew that I wanted to, do woodworking and specifically build stairs. So I've always, I made the choice of, that lifestyle independent artisan path as opposed to, production, the typical American business model of, start a business, make it to where you can replicate it and grow it, and build wealth that way. I didn't want anything to do with that. I became a stair builder first and figured out how to run a business so I could support my habit, of building stairs.
Yeah.
I wish I had thought of that 30 years ago. I know we've talked about that, and it's fascinated me ever since I realized that's what you've done.
Yeah.
Kudos to you.
Well, there's either way you're going to pay the piper. Um, Either path, there's pros and cons. The small independent artisan, the challenge is to make enough money to retire, basically. You can only work so many hours in a day. But I just so enjoyed the physical aspect of doing the work. And wearing all the hats, I got to do all the fun stuff, and then I would tolerate the business side of it, but that was a small price to pay for, having so much fun and enjoying what I did. But I also enjoyed very much, you know, meeting with the clients and being able to extract their ideas and transforming, you know, some of their thoughts and ideas into a dream and making that reality for them. That was I really enjoyed that 1 year follow up, because I could go back and they would just share with me, how the path was of, having an idea and then having it transform to this, you know, physical piece in their house that they can, it's a useful piece of artwork. It's a lot of them, it was a dream come true. And that was always very satisfying for me. That was a lot of fun, just interacting with them and, getting to know them on a personal level and, just being able to help them, realize their dream. I always felt very, you know, there's not a whole lot of, there's not a whole lot of jobs that allows you to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I've always felt very blessed. The Lord knew what he was doing when he sent me down this path, I think.
Excellent.
I just didn't realize how much work it was going to be.
Sometimes we're thankful we don't know those things when we make those hires.
I think I think it would have, clouded my vision early on if I would have realized how much work was involved.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's interesting. With or an organization like the SMA, I mean, where do you see the future of stair building, kind of going? The influence that it has on the industry and, developing codes and getting sort of a lot of different stair building types kind of all together. Like,
Yeah. I mean, I have to be real honest about it. I'm actually kind of jealous. It's like I'm thinking maybe I retired too early. Uh, with what is out there now and the stuff that's being built, what an exciting time to be getting into the stair industry. I mean, man, uh, just look at the Staircraft Award entries this year. Oh my goodness. I mean,
Mind blowing.
wouldn't it be fantastic to be a part of any one of those projects? Oh my gosh. You talk about creativity and just downright fun. Uh, I think it's a fantastic time to get into this industry. Um, it's definitely an industry in transition, I think, because of technology, though. Uh, the first SMA event that I ever attended, when I went to the banquet that night, the first official dinner, there was only one table that had name tags on it. Everybody else just could sit wherever they wanted. And I found my name on that table, and I thought, okay, well, this is the rebel table. They put us in the back, but what this was Dave Cooper's doing. Everybody at that table was a wreath rail maker.
Oh,
You know, the Jim Baldwin was there. Um, and I remember sitting at that table, and gradually you start chit-chatting, and hey, why are we specifically at this table? What did you do? Who did you make? Who who did you have mad at you, kind of thing. And then we realized that everybody at the table was a wreath rail maker. So, an hour after the banquet ended, we're still sitting there talking because really none of us had ever been able to sit across the table from someone and explain what a three quadrant wreathed, you know, rail fitting was and
yeah,
have them understand. Uh,
right.
and so we talked shop well into the night, and that was an amazing experience for me. But the fact that you can buy software and machinery to do that now, um, I think it expands the capabilities tremendously. Um, you know, so you don't have to spend 15 years of intense training to be able to make some of these fittings. It still takes a lot of training, it still takes a lot of skill, but the way the technology has come along, um, it's an exciting time. It really is. And with the materials that are coming out now, and you know, the you don't there's so much more available uh, to assist in design options these days. Just like with what Oak Point offers.
Right.
Um, I mean, all the different aspects. And then, of course, Jeff, you'll like this. So the adhesives. When I started out in my career, it was very challenging for me to find the right adhesives. If you would have ever toured my shop,
I
you
wish I
would
had,
see.
John.
What's that?
I wish I
Oh,
had. You're
I
not
think we
that
all
far
wish we
away.
had.
yeah. Well, I was fanatical about my glue joints, to the point where I custom designed and engineered and had a special helical head made for my joiner. So when I stack laminated wood to glue it together to make my wreath fittings, the glue joint was virtually invisible.
Nice.
And coming up with the different adhesives for specific applications. Yeah, Jeff, I wish I would have known you back in the day. But I know when I went over to Germany, I came home with all kinds of different samples of adhesives, and then you know tested and tested and tested and tested and tested, and this is a great adhesive, but the viscosity is such that it makes too thick of a glue joint regardless of clamp pressure, and all that stuff. How is the finish characteristics of it, and um, but what's available out there now, oh
Oh, yeah, tremendous.
I mean, I think you can go a lot further in your career a lot faster than what I had the opportunity to do, just because of what's available out there. You're not continuously having to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
You can have the technology for this existing wheel and figure out how I don't need the wheel anymore, man. I can levitate this thing, you know. And I really think that's where we are as an industry. Um, if I was a young person getting into this industry now, I would be so excited. Um, just uh, where you can take it in a much shorter period of time, and
Yeah.
the creativity and the design options that are out there, and quite frankly, with the economy that we have, there's I think there's a lot more high-end homes being built now than there was when I got into it, just as a percentage of the general population.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I would be excited. Like I say, sometimes I think I retired too early.
Oh, yeah.
Well, John, you're reminding me of a story. I was coming back from Ligna actually with a bunch of samples of glue in my suitcase. And this is just like, I don't know, Ligna before last or something. And when I got home, I opened my suitcase and there were no samples. There was just a nice note from German Customs saying
Yes.
they could have sent me to prison, but they chose to just confiscate my glue.
Yes.
Things have changed a little.
So I had that issue as well. And there's a company called Jowat.
Oh yeah, no, well,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah. So there was a couple adhesives that was not allowed to be transported that I had no idea about.
Same, yeah, and
then I had a bunch of every time I toured a stair shop, one of the guys, the owner would give me some special little thing, and I had this little kind of miniature German block plane, the typical, European style block plane. Somehow that disappeared.
imagine that.
Along with a couple of other things. I think if the when I was over there, I don't know how it happened, but I ended up meeting the Minister of Labor for the government of Germany.
Oh wow.
He was there to give a talk, and I was there trying to find out more about their apprenticeship program. And I was so frustrated here trying to find an apprentice that I thought maybe I could find somebody from Germany that wanted to, come over and work with me. And somehow through the conversations and meeting people, I ended up having lunch twice with the Minister of Labor from the country of Germany, little me, nobody from Podunk, having lunch with this government official. And he, at the end of it, he gave me this highly prized German beer stein that is like a gift to the woodworkers when they reach a certain level. And that I carried with me on the plane, and I'm so glad I did, because it would have never made it.
Yeah,
It
for
would
sure.
have never made it otherwise.
That's very true. That's very true. Well, so I guess in closing, we got to ask, what is one thing about stairs that you wish everyone in the industry knew?
Ooh. Um, I imagine if you asked 100 people, you'd get 110 different opinions on that question.
Imagine you're right.
Um, I would say having the understanding that we are the ones that can define how our industry changes. I think we are at actually probably for a little while now, I think we've kind of been on the precipice of taking our industry in a whole new light with all of the things that we've talked about. So I would say that just understanding that we individually as stair builders and collectively as an industry, we are the ones to determine where our industry is going to go. And I think the SMA has a big part to do in that, because me as an individual stair builder, my voice is only so loud, regardless of how hard I scream. But collectively, when we all come together, now our voice is more easily heard, and we can influence designs for safety, for creativity. We can influence the architects, we can influence the engineers, we can influence the building codes to develop better, safer, more productive, more beautiful looking stairs. That's up to us.
Thank you for joining us. Be sure to join us for the next episode of Legends, Voices Behind the Craft.